The ego trap in leadership, the need to lead Pt.2. Let me ask you this. Have you ever chased leadership, not because you wanted to serve, but because you wanted the title? Have you ever felt your pride pushing you forward while your purpose lagged behind? If so, you're not alone, because the ego trap is one of the greatest dangers every leader faces. Chapter No. Point 1, the silent enemy of leadership. Ego, the silent enemy of leadership, is not something outside of you. It isn't the economy. It isn't competition. It isn't even the critics who doubt you. The most dangerous enemy of leadership is ego. Ego doesn't announce itself with a loud knock at the door. It doesn't wear a warning label. It comes quietly, slipping into your decisions, shaping your thoughts, feeding your pride. And if you're not careful, it can destroy everything you've built without you even realizing it until it's too late. Ego is subtle. It tells you you've worked hard, you've earned this position, you deserve the spotlight. And maybe you do deserve recognition. Maybe you have put in the work. But ego twists that truth. It convinces you that because you have the title, you no longer need to listen. Because you've achieved success, you no longer need to learn. Because people look to you, you no longer need to serve. And that is where the destruction begins. Have you ever sat in a meeting where someone refused to admit they were wrong? You could feel the air in the room grow heavy. Ideas that could have sparked progress never left people's lips. Silence replaced creativity. And slowly, the team stopped trying, not because they lacked ability, but because the leader's pride blocked the way. That's what ego does. It builds invisible walls between the leader and the people. It cuts off trust. It silences collaboration. It replaces growth with fear. The truth is, people don't want perfect leaders. They don't want leaders who pretend to know it all. They want leaders who are human, who are real, who have the humility to admit mistakes and the courage to change. Ego kills that. Ego makes you defend your image at all costs. It makes you prioritize looking strong over being strong. It makes you more concerned with being right than doing what's right. And in that shift, leadership is lost. I've seen incredibly talented people crash under the weight of their own ego. They had the skills, the intelligence, the opportunities, but instead of growing, they hardened. Instead of listening, they dismissed. Instead of serving, they demanded. And eventually, the very people they were supposed to lead walked away, not because the mission wasn't good, but because they no longer trusted the person leading it. Ego destroys trust faster than anything else. And without trust, leadership is nothing but a hollow title. Jocko Willink, one of the most respected voices on leadership, once said, "Discipline equals freedom." That doesn't just apply to how you wake up in the morning or how you train your body. It applies to the discipline of silencing your ego, the discipline of listening even when you don't want to, the discipline of admitting you don't have the answer, the discipline of putting the mission above your pride. Ego is loud. Discipline is quiet. Ego reacts. Discipline responds. Ego seeks attention, discipline seeks truth, and only one of them leads to real freedom. So let me ask you, how many opportunities in your life have you lost because of ego? How many arguments dragged on too long because you couldn't say the words, "I was wrong"? How many relationships fractured because you were more concerned with winning than with healing? How many doors closed because you couldn't admit you needed help? If we're honest, all of us have scars left by ego. Times when we let pride dictate our decisions, only to realize later how much it cost us. The silent enemy of leadership doesn't just affect CEOs or generals. It affects parents, friends, coaches, teachers, even the way we lead ourselves. Ego shows up when you refuse to forgive. Ego shows up when you dismiss feedback. Ego shows up when you'd rather pretend to be okay than admit you need guidance. And every time ego wins, growth loses. Every time ego speaks louder than humility, leadership weakens. But here's the good news. The enemy can be defeated, not once and for all, but daily. You defeat ego every time you listen instead of interrupt. You defeat it every time you put the mission ahead of your pride. You defeat it when you take responsibility instead of pointing fingers. You defeat it when you ask for help, when you apologize, when you stop performing for applause and start leading for impact. Ego is defeated in the small choices you make every single day. It won't be easy. Ego is persistent. It will whisper that admitting weakness makes you look small. But in truth, admitting weakness is what makes you strong. Ego will tell you that asking for help makes you less of a leader. In truth, asking for help shows your team that strength is found in unity, not isolation. Ego will tempt you to protect your image. But real leadership isn't about protecting your image. It's about protecting your people, your mission, your integrity. The old version of you may have been ruled by ego. The old you thought leadership was about proving yourself, about standing above others, about never being questioned. But the future you, the leader you're capable of becoming, knows that leadership is about service. It's about lifting others, not yourself. It's about creating trust, not fear. It's about walking with humility, not pride. Look at the leaders in history who truly changed the world. Were they remembered because of their titles? Or were they remembered because of the way they influenced lives? Because of their ability to serve something bigger than themselves? Titles fade, applause fades, but influence built on humility lasts forever. Ego is the silent enemy of leadership. It will creep in, it will whisper lies, it will try to convince you that you are untouchable. But the moment you believe that, your foundation begins to crack. And the only way to prevent that collapse is to confront ego every single day, to silence it with humility, to replace it with purpose, to discipline yourself, to lead not with pride, but with service. So I ask you now, are you willing to confront the silent enemy? Are you willing to let go of your pride so you can grab hold of your purpose? Are you willing to trade the illusion of strength for the reality of trust? Because when you do, you'll discover something life-changing. Leadership was never about you. It was always about the mission, the people, the impact. And when ego is no longer your master, you become the kind of leader the world desperately needs. Chapter No. From titles to true influence, from titles to true influence. That is one of the hardest transitions a leader will ever face. You see, titles are easy. They are given, printed on business cards, engraved on office doors. A promotion, an appointment, a ceremony, and suddenly you're in charge. You carry the name manager, director, CEO, captain. People address you differently. They adjust their posture when you walk into the room, and the world whispers to you, "You've made it." But titles are fragile. They are external. They are borrowed power, and the day will come when that title no longer shields you, because titles can be taken away. Influence, on the other hand, can never be stolen. It is earned. Think about it. Have you ever had a boss with the title but no respect? Someone who could give orders but couldn't inspire? They had the authority but not the influence. And then maybe you've met someone else. Maybe they didn't hold the highest position, but when they spoke, people listened. And when they acted, others followed. They weren't leading from a title. They were leading from who they were. That's the difference we're talking about. The ego trap makes us crave titles. It whispers, once you have that position, you'll finally matter. Once people call you by that title, you'll finally be respected. But here's the truth. Respect is not given to the title. It's given to the person. Influence is built in the unseen moments, not in the ceremony of promotion. Influence is built in the long hours when no one is watching, when you choose to stay disciplined, to stay committed, to do the right thing, even when it costs you. There's an old saying, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. Notice it doesn't say, if your title inspires others. It says actions. True influence is lived, not labeled. Let me paint the contrast for you. Imagine the old you, desperate for recognition, hungry for the office with your name on the door, for the applause in the room when you're announced as the leader. That old self believed leadership was about being on top. But the future you, that future leader, isn't chasing applause. The future you doesn't care if the room claps. The future you is satisfied when the people you serve succeed, even if no one remembers your name. The old you live for validation. The future you lives for impact. Which one do you want to be? Jocko Willink once said something powerful. Leadership is not about the leader. It is about the team. And he's right. Titles make it about you. Influence makes it about others. A title says, I have the power. Influence says, I'll empower you. A title can demand obedience. Influence earns loyalty. And when the storms of life hit, obedience will break, but loyalty endures. I've seen this truth play out in families, workplaces, even communities. A father who tries to lead only by authority, because I said so, may control his children for a time, but he won't win their hearts. Compare that to the father who leads with love, with consistency, with humility. That father doesn't just have obedience, he has influence. His children will carry his lessons long after they leave the house, not because of his title, but because of his title. Now, let's get personal. Where are you leading from right now? Are you relying on your title, your role, your position to carry weight, or are you building the kind of influence that survives even if the title is stripped away? Because here's the harsh truth: one day, it will be titles end, careers change, seasons close. And if all you had was the title, you'll find yourself empty. But if you built influence, if you touched lives, if you led with purpose, your legacy will outlive every title you ever held. So, how do we make that shift from titles to true influence? It begins with humility, the willingness to admit you don't have to be the smartest voice in the room. Influence grows when you listen. Influence grows when you serve. Influence grows when you show up consistently, when people know they can count on you, not because you're the boss, but because you're trustworthy. Titles are granted once. Influence must be earned every single day. Think of someone you respect deeply, not because of what they've achieved, but because of how they've lived. Chances are they weren't chasing recognition, they were living with integrity, and that integrity became their influence. That's the secret. Influence is not about charisma, about popularity, about image. Influence is about character. And here's the paradox. When you stop chasing titles, when you stop needing the validation of applause, your influence multiplies. People can sense when you're genuine. They can feel when you're not using them to build your image, but when you're investing in them to build their future. That's when they follow you, not because they have to, but because they want to. That's leadership. But let me be real, it's not easy. Titles are seductive. They make you feel safe, like you've arrived, like you matter. Influence takes longer. Influence requires patience. It requires sacrifice. Sometimes it requires you to swallow your pride, to step back, to let someone else shine. Influence requires you to play the long game when your ego wants instant gratification. But what's more valuable, short-term recognition or long-term impact? If you're listening to this, I want you to think about your life. Where are you still chasing titles? Where are you still looking for the applause of others instead of building true impact? Maybe it's in your career. Maybe it's in your relationships. Maybe it's even in the way you lead yourself. What would happen if, starting today, you shifted from seeking titles to building influence? How would that change the way you work? How would that change the way you love? How would that change the way you lead? Because here's the truth. Anyone can hold a title, but not everyone can hold influence. Titles expire, influence echoes. Titles are remembered in documents. Influence is remembered in lives, and the world doesn't need more leaders with titles. The world needs leaders with influence. Leaders who lift others up. Leaders who don't just wear the title, but embody the role. Leaders who understand that the greatest recognition isn't applause, it's transformation. So I ask you again, who are you becoming? The old you chasing titles and recognition, or the future you building influence that will outlive every stage of your life? You get to decide, and the decision you make will define not only the leader you become, but the legacy you leave behind. Chapter No. 3, the crash of the ego trap. The ego trap promises power, but it always ends in a crash. It tells you that leadership is about being untouchable, always being right, about never showing weakness. And for a while, that illusion feels strong. People might follow you because they're impressed, or maybe because they're afraid. But ego-driven leadership is a house built on sand. It looks solid from the outside, but the moment pressure comes, the moment storms arrive, it collapses. And when it falls, it doesn't just take the leader down. It takes the team, the family, the mission, sometimes the entire legacy with it. You've probably seen it before. A leader who once inspired everyone, but somewhere along the way, they stopped listening. They started believing their own hype. Every meeting became about proving their brilliance. Every conversation turned into a competition. And little by little, people stopped trusting them. At first, it's subtle, fewer ideas shared in the room, more silence when questions are asked. Eventually, the silence turns into disengagement. The fire goes out, the crash begins long before it's visible. That's the danger of ego. It blinds you. It convinces you that as long as you hold the title, as long as you have authority, things are fine. But leadership is fragile when it's built on ego, because people don't want to follow arrogance forever. They might obey it, they might endure it, but they will never give their hearts to it. And without trust, there is no true leadership. Jocko Willink often talks about extreme ownership, the idea that a leader takes responsibility for everything that happens under their watch. Ego is the opposite of ownership. Ego blames others. Ego makes excuses. Ego points fingers. And when that kind of leadership is tested, when the company faces a crisis, when the team faces setbacks, when the family faces hardship, ego collapses. It has nothing real to stand on. The crash of the ego trap doesn't always happen in public. Sometimes it happens privately in the quiet of your own soul. Maybe you felt it. That moment when you realize the respect people show you isn't real. It's fear. That moment when you look in the mirror and realize you're isolated, not because people abandoned you, but because you pushed them away with pride. That moment when you realize that the very walls you built to protect yourself became the prison that traps you. That's the real crash. It's not just about losing followers, it's about losing yourself. But here's the truth. You need to hear failure is not final. The crash doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes the crash is the very thing that wakes you up. Sometimes it's the only thing strong enough to shatter the illusions of ego and force you to confront reality. And in that moment, you are faced with a choice. Will you keep pretending, or will you finally rebuild on the foundation of humility? I remember a story about a leader who lost everything. His company collapsed, his reputation was shattered, and his team scattered. For months, he lived in shame, replaying his mistakes. He had led with pride, refused advice, ignored warnings. The crash was devastating. But slowly something changed. He began to listen. He began to ask for help. He began to lead not from a place of image, but from a place of purpose. And over time, he rebuilt not the same empire, but something better: trust, influence, legacy. The crash that once felt like the end became the beginning of a different kind of leadership. Maybe you've had your own crashes. Maybe they weren't public. Maybe they weren't about titles, but about relationships, about opportunities, about personal growth. Maybe you've lost trust, lost connection, lost yourself because ego had its grip on you. If so, hear this: you're not alone. Every leader, every human being wrestles with ego, and many of us have scars from the crash. But scars don't mean the fight is over. Scars mean you survived, and survival means you have the chance to grow stronger, wiser, more grounded than before. The old version of you may have been driven by ego, needing to be right, needing to be seen, needing to prove. But the future version of you can rise from the crash with something far more powerful: authenticity. When ego dies, authenticity is born, and authenticity is what people follow. Not perfection, not image, but honesty, humility, courage. Think about the leaders who've had the biggest impact on your life. Were they flawless? No. Were they untouchable? No. They were human. They were real. They admitted mistakes. They asked for forgiveness. They showed you that leadership isn't about being above others. It's about walking with them. That's what the crash of the ego trap can teach you if you let it. It teaches you that real leadership is not destroyed by mistakes. It's built by how you respond to them. So let me ask you directly: are you heading toward a crash? Are there warning signs you've been ignoring? Is your ego making you deaf to feedback, blind to reality, closed off from the people who care about you? If so, don't wait until it all collapses. Don't wait until you lose everything to wake up. You have the chance now to change, to step back, to humble yourself, to choose influence over image, purpose over pride. Because here's the thing: when the crash comes, and it will if ego leads the way, the pain is deep. But the deeper the fall, the stronger the rebuild can be if you let it. Sometimes life tears down the fragile structures we build so that we can finally construct something real. The crash may break your pride, but it can also set you free. Free from pretending, free from performing, free from carrying the exhausting weight of ego. The world doesn't need leaders who never fall. It needs leaders who fall and rise again, stronger, humbler, wiser. Leaders who can look back on the crash and say, that was the turning point. That was when I stopped leading for myself and started leading for others. The ego trap leads to the crash, but the crash doesn't have to be your end. It can be your beginning. The question is, when that moment comes, will you cling to your pride, or will you rise with purpose? Chapter No. 4, the future self leading with purpose, not pride. Picture this: the old you, fueled by ego, always chasing validation, always needing to be noticed. That old you thought leadership was about titles, applause, and control. But then imagine the future you: calm, focused, grounded. A leader who doesn't need the spotlight to feel secure. A leader who is no longer driven by pride, but by purpose. That version of you exists. That version of you is waiting, The question is, are you willing to step into it? The transformation from pride to purpose is not easy. Pride feels good in the moment. It feeds something inside us that craves recognition. It tells us you matter because people see you. You're important because people praise you. But purpose offers something far deeper. Purpose whispers, you matter because of the difference you make. You're important because lives are changed when you show up. Pride seeks validation. Purpose seeks impact. And that shift is what separates leaders who burn out from leaders who leave a legacy. Think about your own life. How many times have you been caught chasing approval? Maybe it was in your career, working long hours, not because you loved the mission, but because you wanted to impress your boss or your peers. Maybe it was in your family, trying to always look strong, never admitting weakness because you thought that's what leadership required. Or maybe it was within yourself, pushing harder and harder just to prove to the voice in your head that you were enough. That's pride, and it's exhausting. But the future self, the leader led by purpose, doesn't need to prove anything. They don't need applause to feel secure. They don't need the title to feel worthy. They know who they are. And because they know who they are, they can serve others without fear. That kind of leadership is magnetic. It draws people in not because of image, but because of authenticity. Jocko Willink has often said that leadership is about balancing dichotomies. You need confidence, but not arrogance. You need to take charge, but also listen. You need to be strong, but also humble. Purpose allows you to find that balance. Pride pushes you to extremes. It makes you either overconfident or insecure. Purpose steadies you. It anchors you. It keeps you focused on the mission, not your ego. Let's be real. Life will test you. People will criticize you. Someone will misunderstand you. If you're fueled by pride, those things will crush you. Every insult will feel like a dagger. Every setback will feel like proof that you're not good enough. But if you're fueled by purpose, those same challenges will refine you. Criticism becomes feedback. Failure becomes a lesson. Setbacks become setups for growth. Purpose turns obstacles into stepping stones. Now, let me ask you, what would your life look like if you truly led with purpose instead of pride? Think about it. How would your relationships change if you cared less about being right and more about being present? How would your career change if you stopped chasing promotions and started chasing impact? How would your inner world change if you stopped needing to prove your worth and started living it? That's the future self you're capable of becoming. But here's the truth. Becoming that leader requires death. The death of ego, the death of the old self, the death of the need for control. It feels like loss at first, but it's not really loss. It's freedom. When you stop leading for yourself, you're free to lead for others. And in that freedom, you find peace, strength, and clarity you never had before. I've met leaders who live this way, and their presence alone was transformational. They didn't walk into rooms trying to dominate attention. They walked in trying to listen. They didn't brag about their accomplishments. They asked about yours. They weren't concerned with how people saw them. They were concerned with how they could serve. And ironically, those leaders were the ones people followed with passion, loyalty, and love, because people can feel the difference. They know when you're leading for yourself and when you're leading for them. And the future self, the leader led by purpose, not pride, creates ripple effects. It's not just about the team, the company, or the mission. It's about legacy. The influence of a prideful leader dies with their title, but the influence of a purposeful leader lives on in the people they've touched. It carries forward, multiplying through generations. That's the kind of leadership the world desperately needs. Maybe right now, you're standing at a crossroads. On one side is the old path, the path of pride. It looks shiny, it feels rewarding in the moment, but it ends in emptiness. On the other side is the path of purpose. It requires sacrifice, it requires humility, it requires patience, but it ends in fulfillment, freedom, and impact that lasts. Which path will you choose? Here's the challenge: start small. Purpose isn't found in grand speeches or dramatic gestures. Purpose is found in the little choices. Choosing to listen instead of interrupt, choosing to encourage instead of criticize, choosing to give instead of take, choosing to stand firm in your values even when no one is watching. Each choice is a brick, and together, those bricks build the foundation of the future you. You don't become a leader of purpose overnight. It's a daily practice, a daily battle against ego, a daily reminder of what truly matters. But every step you take brings you closer to the leader you were meant to be. And when you look back, you'll realize the old self, the one driven by pride, wasn't your strength. It was your prison. The future self, the one led by purpose, that's your freedom. So I'll ask you one final question. Who will you choose to be? The old leader, trapped in ego, chasing titles and applause, or the future leader, guided by purpose, building something bigger than yourself? The choice is yours, and it begins today, because the world is waiting. Your family is waiting. Your team is waiting. And most importantly, your own soul is waiting for you to step into the leader you were always meant to be. Lead with purpose, not pride, and watch how everything changes. So I ask you, are you ready to step out of the ego trap? Are you ready to stop chasing titles and start building legacies? Because the world doesn't need more leaders with pride. It needs leaders with purpose, leaders with discipline, leaders who rise not for applause, but for impact. If this message spoke to you, don't just keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs strength today, and subscribe to Soul Vibe, where motivation meets soul. And now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What's the biggest leadership struggle you've faced? Ego, fear, doubt, or something else? Let's build a community where we don't just talk motivation, we live it together. Because when one of us grows, we all rise.